Viewers, what you're about to hear will shock you. The U.S. government has just announced new immigration policies that could trigger mass deportations of Jamaicans living in America. Officials say it's part of a broader crackdown on undocumented immigrants and visa overstays. But the Jamaican community is directly in the spotlight. For decades, Jamaicans have been among the largest and most influential immigrant groups in the U.S., shaping culture, food, sports, and music. From Florida and New York to Texas and California, Jamaican workers, students, and families have built lives and contributed billions to the American economy. But now, that reality is under threat. The U.S. announcement outlines new measures that tighten deportation priorities, expand workplace raids, and reduce protections for long-term undocumented immigrants, many of whom are Jamaicans. In fact, some reports suggest that Jamaica could be one of the top countries affected by these deportations in 2025. The big question is, why now? Why is the U.S. targeting a community that has been so integral to its workforce and culture? And how will this affect both Jamaica and America moving forward? Stay with me, because in this video we're breaking down exactly what the U.S. announced, why Jamaicans are being hit hardest, and what the fallout could mean for families, businesses, and entire economies. So what exactly did the U.S. government announce? According to official statements from the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, the U.S. is rolling out an aggressive immigration enforcement plan in 2025. This includes increased deportations of undocumented immigrants, regardless of how long they've been in the U.S., expanded workplace enforcement, meaning employers who hire undocumented workers could face fines and raids, stricter visa checks, especially for H-2B seasonal workers, F-1 students, and visitors who overstay. Reduced access to temporary protected status, TPS, which many Jamaicans previously benefited from after hurricanes and natural disasters. Officials argue this is about restoring order and protecting American jobs. But critics say it's politically motivated, a way to appeal to voters who want tougher immigration policies ahead of the next election. Here's the kicker. Jamaicans are among the top groups affected because of their significant presence in Florida, New York, and New Jersey. Many came legally on work visas but overstayed when opportunities back home were scarce. Others arrived decades ago and built entire lives, only to now face the prospect of removal. This announcement doesn't mean every Jamaican will suddenly be deported, but it does mean immigration officers now have broader powers to target, detain, and deport. And that's sending shockwaves across the diaspora. Why are Jamaicans being singled out in these new rules? One reason is numbers. The U.S. Census and immigration data show that Jamaicans make up one of the largest Caribbean immigrant groups in America, with more than 1 million Jamaicans living in the country. A significant percentage are either undocumented or on temporary visas that are set to expire. Another factor is workforce concentration. Jamaicans are heavily represented in key industries like hospitality, agriculture, nursing, and construction. There's also a political dimension. For years, immigration from Latin America has dominated the headlines, but targeting Jamaicans and other Caribbean nationals allows leaders to show they're applying policies across the board rather than focusing only on the U.S.-Mexico border. Finally, there's the visa overstays problem. While many people assume most undocumented immigrants cross the border illegally, the reality is that a huge number simply overstay their visas. Jamaicans are high on that list, especially with student and seasonal worker visas. This makes them an easy group to target with new enforcement. The result? Jamaicans are now front and center in America's immigration debate, whether they like it or not. If there's one state where these deportations will hit hardest, it's Florida. Florida is home to the largest Jamaican population in the U.S., with communities in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, and Orlando. Jamaicans here work in hotels, cruise lines, hospitals, and farms. They've built businesses, churches, and vibrant cultural enclaves. But Florida's state government has also been among the strictest on immigration. Recent laws have made it harder for undocumented workers to get jobs, rent housing, or even receive medical care. With the new federal crackdown, many Jamaicans in Florida now face a double burden: hostile state laws plus tougher federal enforcement. Already, immigration attorneys in Miami report an uptick in detention cases. Families are being torn apart as breadwinners are suddenly deported, leaving children, many of them U.S. citizens, behind. And let's not forget the impact on tourism and agriculture. Farmers in Central Florida rely on Jamaican seasonal workers for harvest. Hotels in Orlando and Miami depend on Jamaican staff to keep operations running. Without them, businesses face labor shortages and skyrocketing costs. Florida may be at the heart of the crackdown, but its economy may also suffer the most from losing the very workers it depends on. Next, let's talk about New York and New Jersey, the heart of the Jamaican diaspora in America. For decades, cities like Brooklyn, Queens, and Newark have been cultural strongholds of Jamaican life. From reggae music and jerk restaurants to community centers and churches, Jamaicans have been essential in shaping the culture of these states. But the new deportation push is hitting here too. Immigration lawyers in New York report higher deportation proceedings against Jamaicans who overstayed visas or were caught in minor legal infractions years ago. The impact is devastating. Families who've lived in New York for 20 or 30 years suddenly face separation. Many deportees barely have ties to Jamaica anymore. Their homes, businesses, and children are all in the U.S. For the diaspora, this feels like a betrayal. These are the very states where Jamaicans paid taxes, worked tough jobs, and even served in the U.S. military, and now they're being told they don't belong. Community leaders warn that the deportation wave could tear apart neighborhoods that Jamaicans have helped sustain for generations. Behind the headlines are real people, and their stories are heartbreaking. Take, for example, a Jamaican nurse in New York who overstayed her visa after being recruited during a U.S. healthcare shortage. She's worked in hospitals for years, paying taxes and serving patients. But under the new rules, she's facing deportation. Or a farmer in Florida who brings in Jamaican workers every season. His crops depend on them. Now, with tighter visa enforcement, he says he'll lose millions and may be forced to shut down. Then there's the family in New Jersey. The father, undocumented for 20 years, has 3 children who are U.S. citizens. Deportation would split the family in half. The kids could stay, but their father would be sent back to Jamaica with nothing. These are not isolated cases. Across America, Jamaicans are bracing for arrests at workplaces, random ID checks, and immigration sweeps. Some are even afraid to go to hospitals or report crimes, worried that police will hand them over to immigration. For families, the fear is constant. Will today be the day they knock on my door? Community organizations are running support workshops and clinics to help families prepare. The fallout doesn't stop in the U.S. It extends all the way back to Jamaica. One of the biggest concerns is remittances. Money sent home by Jamaicans abroad accounts for billions of dollars every year, making it one of the largest sources of foreign exchange for the island. If mass deportations reduce that flow, families will struggle to pay school fees, build homes, and cover basic needs. Communities that rely heavily on U.S.-based relatives could face sudden financial collapse. There's also the issue of reintegration. Many deportees left Jamaica decades ago and have no homes, jobs, or support systems waiting for them. They arrive in Kingston with nothing but a suitcase, often stigmatized as deportees, making it hard to find employment. The Jamaican government has already expressed alarm, calling the U.S. announcement unfair and discriminatory. Officials say they're working to negotiate protections for Jamaicans, but in reality, Jamaica may not have the leverage to stop the deportations. The truth is simple. Mass deportations would not only hurt Jamaicans in the U.S., but also destabilize Jamaica's fragile economy. Ironically, these deportations could also backfire on the U.S. itself. Jamaicans are a critical part of America's workforce. They dominate in industries like healthcare, hospitality, construction, and agriculture. Deporting thousands of them will create labor shortages that Americans themselves are unwilling or unprepared to fill. Florida farmers already warn of crops rotting in the fields. Hotels in New York say they're understaffed. Hospitals are struggling to replace Jamaican nurses who are known for their skill and dedication. Economists predict that if deportations continue at this scale, the U.S. could face billions in losses, particularly in states with heavy Caribbean workforces. There's also the cultural impact. Jamaicans have given America reggae, dancehall, track and field champions, and vibrant Caribbean neighborhoods that attract tourists. Stripping that away weakens the very diversity that makes America strong. So while the deportations might play well politically, the long-term economic cost could be devastating. The world is watching America's actions closely, and the reactions are pouring in. Across the Caribbean, leaders have been quick to voice alarm. Prime ministers from Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and St. Lucia have issued joint statements condemning the U.S. crackdown, calling it destabilizing for the region. CARICOM has already signaled that it will lobby Washington to reconsider, warning that sudden deportations could overwhelm small island economies and undermine regional stability. Some even argue that this move violates long-standing agreements on labor mobility and migrant rights. Beyond the Caribbean, the policy is stirring waves in Canada and the United Kingdom. Both countries, which already host large Jamaican populations, are quietly positioning themselves as alternatives. Canada is rolling out new visa programs for healthcare workers and farm laborers, roles Jamaicans excel in, while the UK has hinted at expanding post-Brexit labor pathways for Caribbean nationals. The message is clear. If the US turns its back, others are ready to welcome Jamaican talent. Then there's China, which has seized the moment to strengthen its influence. African nations have also weighed in. Leaders in Ghana and Nigeria have expressed solidarity with Jamaica. For Washington, that's a worrying sign, because every Jamaican worker or student who bypasses the U.S. represents another foothold for China in the Americas. The bottom line? This isn't just a U.S.-Jamaica issue anymore. It's becoming a global story about migration, influence, and shifting alliances, and it may reshape geopolitics in ways Washington didn't anticipate. On the streets of Kingston, Montego Bay, and Spanish Town, the reactions are raw and emotional. Some Jamaicans feel outright anger. They argue that the U.S. has benefited from Jamaican labor for decades, in hospitals, on farms, in schools, and is now discarding them as if they were disposable. Others are gripped by fear and uncertainty. Families with relatives abroad don't know whether their loved ones will be sent home with little warning. The diaspora is just as vocal. In New York, large rallies are forming with banners that read, "Jamaica built America too." In Florida, church leaders are organizing prayer vigils for families at risk of separation. On social media, the debate is heated. Some argue that deportees should come home and rebuild Jamaica, pointing out that the country needs their skills and investment. But others counter that Jamaica is not prepared to suddenly absorb thousands of returnees, especially those with no housing, no jobs, and little connection to the island after decades abroad. Younger people often see opportunity in return migration, imagining new businesses and cultural revival. Older Jamaicans, however, remember past waves of deportations that fueled unemployment and crime. What's clear is that Jamaicans everywhere, at home and abroad, feel the weight of this moment. So, what happens next? Right now, legal battles are intensifying. Immigration advocates across the U.S. are filing lawsuits to block mass deportations, arguing that they violate due process and international human rights commitments. Some federal judges have already issued temporary injunctions, but these could be overturned in higher courts. Meanwhile, U.S. lawmakers are divided. Some, particularly in states with large Caribbean populations like New York and Florida, warn that the crackdown will devastate communities and local economies. Others, however, are pushing the White House to go further, insisting that mass deportations are necessary to protect American jobs. In Jamaica, the government is scrambling. Prime Minister Andrew Holness has called emergency meetings with CARICOM leaders and is lobbying Washington for special protections. Officials are also preparing for worst-case scenarios, identifying housing for returnees, reviewing labor market needs, and even negotiating with Canada and the UK to absorb some displaced workers. For Jamaicans in the US, the message from lawyers is clear: get your paperwork in order. That means securing legal representation, renewing expired documents where possible, and knowing your rights if confronted by immigration officials. But the truth is, unless US policy shifts, deportations could begin within months. The next year will likely determine the fate of thousands of families, and whether Jamaica can withstand the shock of absorbing so many returnees. What's certain is that the stakes are incredibly high. The U.S. announcement has sent shockwaves across the Jamaican diaspora. For decades, Jamaicans have been essential to America's workforce and culture. They've raised families, built businesses, and enriched communities. But now, they face the threat of mass deportations that could reshape both America and Jamaica. This is more than a policy change. It's a human story about families, sacrifice, and survival. And as the world watches, one thing is certain: the outcome will define the future of U.S.-Caribbean relations for years to come. For those affected, seek legal help, stay informed, and support community organizations assisting families through this crisis. For decades, Jamaicans have been essential to America's workforce and culture. They've raised families, built businesses, and enriched communities. But now, they face the threat of mass deportations that could reshape both America and Jamaica. This is more than a policy change. It's a human story about families, sacrifice, and survival. And as the world watches, one thing is certain: the outcome will define the future of U.S.-Caribbean relations for years to come.